Hey guys, what's up? Chemistry here. Today we're going to look at some of the effect plugins on FL Studio 10. We'll be kind of going through most of the functions and hopefully helping you guys out with your mix down. Most of the reason why we use effect plugins are to enhance our instrument, enhance our sound, enhance our synths. It's really just for enhancement, really. It can also be used on vocals and just about anything, really. So I guess we'll get right into it. I'm going to open up Nexus 2 and I'm going to go in piano. And it's going to get a nice piano preset. I'm going to take out the reverb because that's an effect that we're going to look at. So that's the piano. I'm going to link that to the mixer. And now that that is linked, clicking on Insert 1, we can go to these arrows and pick any effect we want. This is Fruity Reverb 2. And generally what reverb is used for is to add realism to your sound, and by doing that it adds ambience. When you would play an instrument, let's say you take your drums and you bring it into a garage, you would generally have an ambience that would happen when you would play, just like if you played in a church or if you played in those huge parking garages. You generally have a lot of echo, a lot of ambience that would happen when you started playing your instrument. Now when you're working with a studio and you don't use any reverb, then there's none of that. So that is what reverb is generally used for. It's to add that realism that your instrument is being played in a room or in an environment where there would be ambience. Now that environment is illustrated right here. Now it's always making the illusion that it's in a room and not in the outdoors, even though it can kind of sound like it. So this is our room right here. It has so many walls and it just basically looks like a cylinder. If we take out, if we turn down the diffusion, we're going to get lesser walls, and then eventually we'll kind of get a triangle. Obviously not many rooms are triangle. Most rooms are actually square, and I'm talking about like a literal room. But most people don't even like using a cube type of room. I'd say most people just stick with the cylinder like structure. Now you can change the actual size of your room. For instance, if I turn up the wet slider right here, and all that wet does is generally turn up the overall effect. So now we have more reverb. Now if I had the size to very small like this, you can tell that it just kind of sounds like very small. There's not that much reverb going on. But if I move it to its full size, its biggest size, there's more kind of space to breathe, I guess. So those are two things to kind of consider. Don't always go for the biggest size. I tend to go towards bigger sizes, obviously, but depending on the actual sound, I'll actually go with more of a medium size. Depending on what sound you're actually adding reverb to, you're going to get a different ambience, and that's something to remember. If you're trying to add a reverb to a super saw, then obviously your ambience is going to be a little bit different. Your release is going to be a little bit different than if you had I don't know, like a bass. Now I also like to look at low cut and high cut. If I turn up the low cut knob, I'm just removing bass, and then if I keep on turning it up, I'm removing mid section, and then even high section if I move up the low cut to 4 o'clock. But generally I like to move the low cut to around 9 o'clock depending on what sound I'm actually trying to reverb, because if I have my reverb or my ambience with the low cut off, which just means that there's no actual bass cut, that means that all bass is present in the ambience, that ambience can kind of get in the way with the low frequencies of my kick and my bass and anything else that is around the 100 hertz range. So I generally like to cut off a lot of that low end ambience by moving the low cut to about 9 o'clock. And it doesn't really make that much of a difference. I think it sounds cleaner. If I bring the high cut higher, then we're going to have a much brighter sound because we're letting in more high frequencies in the ambience. I'm gonna make the size bigger so hopefully it's easier to kind of hear the actual reverb. Yeah, so if I go into damp right here, this damp knob, that is actually, I think it kind of boosts higher frequencies or lets it in. Generally it makes it much brighter in my opinion for the actual reverb itself. And decay is another thing. Decay is above amp, and that generally makes or controls how long you're going to hear ambience. So if I have the decay to 0.1 seconds, generally no reverb at all. If I have it to 10 seconds, then we're going to hear reverb for literally 10 seconds. And we're going to hear that until that 10 seconds is up, and it'll just kind of fade out. Now, I never usually have it that high. I'd go as high as 3 seconds most of the time, unless I'm really trying to make some very, very ambient sound. Then I go up to about, I don't know, 4 seconds or so. But generally I keep it around 2 seconds. And you can also control when you want that reverb to come in with the delay knob, which is right over the size knob. So if I turn up the delay to, let's say, 500 milliseconds, you can hear that the ambience only comes in after 500 milliseconds. Don't usually do this either. I usually keep it to 0 milliseconds. But if I'm working with a clap that has a long tail and I really want to hear that reverb after the clap is done, I will bring up the reverb a little bit, or not, sorry, not the reverb, the delay a little bit, because I want to really hear it after the clap is done. And that's just an example. You can use this delay anywhere as you want, but that's generally where I like to have it. But make sure that if you are going to do this, that the ambience is coming in on time with the actual beat itself, or else it'll sound off. But anyway, that is generally the reverb. One last knob I want to look at, and it's quite important, is this one right here. It's the master stereo separation for the entire reverb sound. So if I move that towards the left, we're going to have the reverb come in a different spot on our speaker or headphone. You're really going to hear it on your headphones. And as opposed to if I move it all the way to the right, you can have it kind of in between. But generally that is the overall sound. So it's good to stereo separate the reverb at which the ambience is coming out of in your speaker. That will really help your mix down. So now we're going to look at some delay. Delay is usually used as an echo. It adds echo to your sound, but technically what it's actually doing is just taking the sound that you're giving to it, and it's just sampling it and then playing it again and again and again at a later and later and later time. That's usually in sync with your actual tempo. Now if I play one note on the piano, and I'm only going to hit the key once, you can see that we heard the piano note much more than once, of course. And you can control when that comes in, at what frequency we're going to hear that delay, that echo, where it's coming out on our speaker, how loud, how long, filter effects, all that kind of stuff. Now generally I like to have the feedback come in on ping pong. I think it sounds much better. I think it's more of a stereo separation type thing. Just kind of goes in each speaker from left to right. OFS generally does the same thing. If you move it towards the right, we're going to get a different stereo separation, as opposed to moving it more to the left. I like to move it towards the right. I'm not really sure why, just preference. Now in the feedback section here, we have volume and cut. Now if we move up the volume, what we're really doing is making it so that we have a longer lasting echo. So if I move it to 9 o'clock, it should last for quite a long time. So yeah, I only hit the C key once there, so if I turn down the cut, then I think we are going to get a low pass type thing happen after a certain amount of time. So if I move it to 12 o'clock, you can see that we have a bit of filtering going on at the end of the actual echo, which is a good idea to use every once in a while. Now in the input section we have pan, that controls at what side of the speaker we're actually getting echo from. Of course we have OFS that's on right now, and ping pong, which is stereo separation, so the panning might not actually be so accurate. I wouldn't generally use it if you're going to use the OFS, but that's what it does. It just kind of moves from left to right on the speaker, which is just same thing as general panning. And the volume knob here, that controls the initial echo. At least that's what it sounds like. You're controlling the initial sound of the echo, the initial volume. Like let's say I have the input volume to I don't know, what is that, like above 3 o'clock, almost 4 o'clock. Here I'll remove the cut so you can really hear it. You can see that the first few hits, the first few echoes were probably even louder than the actual initial key that I hit. If I turn that down, then we get much less echo from the very beginning. I like to generally have that around from 12 to, I'd say, 2 o'clock-ish. And I generally have the feedback at around 2 to 3 o'clock. But yeah, that's generally what delay does. It's used to make echo. Moving right along, we could look at EQ. It's still technically an effect plugin, equalizers, Parametric EQ 2. It's generally used to balance certain frequencies in your sound, to boost them or to turn them down. Because if you ever play a sound, no matter what sound it is, we're going to get frequency, or at least the sound is going to fit in certain frequencies on the audio spectrum. Now if I go in the very low octaves, you can barely hear all of that, but as you can see, it's so low that it's staying around the left side of the audio spectrum, which all this screen is just a huge audio spectrum, from low frequencies to high frequencies. If I move it to high octaves, it barely even shows up on the left side here. So generally, what we do with EQ is we generally want to have our sound blend in and sound fit, sound clear, when we have more than one instrument happen or play at once. I like to have a low cut, which is this right here. You just have to kind of mess around with the top section here and make it so that you get this. You take it, push it down twice, and use this dot and scroll down while clicking, and you'll get this kind of cut. I like cutting probably with a piano until I get to around the low mid section, as you can see up here, low mid. It does cut out a lot of the lower notes of the piano, so it does depend if you're actually using lower notes. If your piano is going to be played without a kick, without a bass, without any type of low frequency instrument, then you don't even have to really low cut anything if you don't want to. But if I have a piano playing along with my kick and my bass, then it's pretty reasonable for me to want to just cut off low frequencies, because we're really not going to hear it on the piano and it's going to sound messy. So that's why I cut off low frequencies, to let more space to breathe for my bass and my kick. And I usually like to boost high frequencies to enhance the actual clearness of my sound. So if I want my sound to sound clear, to sound bright, I generally just boost higher frequencies, anything past the upper mid section. So yeah, just something like that. There's all these knobs here really are just the same thing as just clicking on your own. It just makes it so that you don't lose the actual hertz that you want to boost. So you can use that like this, but never equalize the way I'm doing it right now. That will just distort your sound and make it sound horrible in so many different ways. So when you're EQing, make sure that you just do it very lightly and gently, and you don't over exaggerate. This here is a master slider here, so we're actually just turning up the sound. It says +6. All that means is it's going up +6 decibels from the original volume level. So really just turning it up. You could basically do the same thing if you wanted, just turning up every single band here. We just turn them all up like this, and then you're basically doing the exact same thing. So if you're generally just going to be EQing this way, you might as well just turn up the overall master band here. Yeah, but yeah, that's generally what you do with the EQ. There's so many different other presets. Like this is low cut and this is high cut, which is generally just, if you see low cut here, it's cutting off lower frequencies and it's letting high frequencies in first. So as you can see, high frequencies are coming in first and then low frequencies. High cut is the exact opposite. It's when you're letting in low frequencies in first, so low pass, high cut, and you're letting low frequencies in first, and then you can see that the midsection would be coming in. So for example, that would be considered a low pass, and this low cut would be considered a high pass, like this. And there's a lot of filters that do exactly that. We could look into filters right now. This is the Fruity Free filter. It's as simple as it gets. We have type low pass. This is what we just looked at on the first demonstration, on the first demonstration, not the second. We have frequency here, frequency Q. That's the general effect, resonance effect. If you turn it all the way up, you're going to hear a big kind of whistle while you're doing your filtering. And the gain is generally just the general gain of your sound, because you might actually lose some volume when you're filtering. So it's like your makeup gain. That's usually what they like to call it, I think. So you have low pass here, for example, type low pass, and if you have the frequency set to 10 hertz, you're not going to hear anything. But if I move it up, we're getting that effect. Now, thanks to the Fruity Free filter, we can have a resonance effect. So if I turn this up all the way, we're going to hear a huge kind of whistle. We don't generally use that much. I actually like to have it just at 1 or 2 little bars there, because I generally don't like that large whistle. But you can also change to band pass, high pass, notch, low shelf, high shelf, things like that. High pass is what we looked at on the second demonstration. You're not going to hear anything at 16,000 hertz, so it's the exact opposite of low pass. So you're letting in low frequencies first. Does that make we're high pass. So we're passing high frequencies. So we're letting high frequencies in first. Band pass is using both low pass and high pass at the same time, which is generally what we had earlier. So this would be like a band pass right here. So we're letting in the general section. Let me see if I could go back to the default. So to get a band pass band here, I think this is it. This would be band pass on our number 3 here. So we're letting in a certain section of frequencies in, and notch is backwards. So this is notch, and notch gives you a really, really cool effect. Let's see. So you can actually get something going here, because anyway, I found that pretty cool. But yeah, so we're kind of dragging on a little bit, aren't we? So those are filters. We usually use filters to fade things in. We want to fade sounds in without using volume gain. We can easily just use filters and things like that. It's also to keep certain frequencies from being into your sound, so that's why we use it as well. Sometimes we keep our frequencies at a very low level and we don't use any high frequencies for certain sounds, such as basses, for instance. One more thing we're going to look at is compressors. This I left for last because I find it's the most complicated. For some reason, I never fully grasp onto what compressors are and what they actually do. I generally don't use them that often, but they're really good, I find, for vocals and kicks, because when you have a singer, for example, you have this a cappella and you have a singer, and people aren't always perfect when they're placing their mouth from a certain distance to the microphone, and you know, a lot of people will generally sound somewhat louder, let's say in the chorus or in certain syllables. They'll say a certain syllable much louder, or it'll come out much louder than a bunch of other syllables, but we don't want to have to turn that down. We want everything to be very loud. We want everything to be very clear. So what we do is we set a threshold. We set a certain threshold, so if volume gets too loud at some point, that it'll turn down automatically. So that's our threshold right here. At 0 decibels, there's still a threshold, but generally you would have to turn it down a little bit to hear an actual effect. So let's say we have the threshold to -10 decibels. That means if the sound gets above this mark here, which is -10 on the decibel meter, if the volume of the vocals or kick or whatever instrument goes above that, for instance, if it goes up to -5 decibels, then the compression will begin. Compression is basically like setting a brick wall and then compressing the sound so that it stays beneath that brick wall. Now the ratio is kind of determining like how much compression is actually going on, from a ratio from something to 1. If it's from 1 to 1, then we're actually getting no effect. But for instance, if it was from 5 to 1, that means if for every 5 decibels that goes over the threshold, it'll come out as 1. So I know that's extremely hard to grasp onto, but let's say I have a vocals or a singer with, you know, obviously a vocal sample, an a cappella sample, and for some reason the singer said a certain word or a certain syllable very loud, that went much over -10 decibels, then for every 5 decibels that go over 10 decibels, it'll come out as 1. So we're getting quite a bit of actual compression, generally. Now, of course, a lot of this you can just do by ear, and you don't have to worry so much about how things actually happen, how things actually work technically. But I'm trying to explain that. Generally, what's happening is you have a sound, it's going too loud. Once it's too loud, depending on the ratio, it'll get softer. And the way it'll get softer, how long it'll get softer, is determined by the attack and the release. Now the attack generally just makes it so that it just kind of determines how long it takes for the full compression to begin, because the only time that the actual compression begins is when the sound goes above -10 decibels or -20 or just, I don't know, -5, whatever you choose for the threshold. The limiter actually has good visuals for this. If you go into compression, the threshold is like a ceiling, so you can see that blue line is like our ceiling here, and the ratio is how much is actually being compressed. So you can see right now that we're getting 5 to 1 would be this right here. So we're seeing that it's not really letting too much in right now, and it's just how much is actually happening, how much compression is happening. So that's basically what's going on right now. The threshold is our ceiling. The ratio is determining how much compression is actually happening for the amount of decibels that's going over that ceiling, and the attack is just the amount of time it takes for that full compression to begin, or to that full compression to happen. to reach full compression. I generally like the attack to be pretty quick, but sometimes it is useful to have longer attack for the actual compression. If I'm using vocals, then I'll have the attack pretty low because I want the compression to start immediately, if not very soon. The release is how long it takes for the actual compression to end, I believe. So if I have it for longer, then that will mean that once the sound goes above the threshold, and for every 5 decibels it comes out as 1 decibel, and then it'll just kind of, that will all be determined through the attack. And anyway, this is very complicated, I know, and it doesn't really make much sense. I refrained from trying to explain compressors, but they are quite useful, and it can really make your sound very professional. So as you can see here on the decibel meter, we are going barely over 5 decibels. So I'm going to turn that down to -8. We're going to make our ceiling at -8 decibels so that whenever our sound goes above this mark right here where my mouse is, -8, we're going to get compression. You naturally don't hear that much of a difference, and that's generally because you're not supposed to. It's supposed to make it sound very powerful. If you hear a huge difference in your sound, then you might have done something wrong. But it's generally supposed to make your sound more powerful when it's without actually turning it up too much. And then because a lot of sound actually has a lot of variation with it, like in the vocals, for example, some of the sounds will be too loud and some of them will be too soft. So if you use a compressor, the sounds that are too loud will get turned down a little bit when they happen, but the sounds that are too soft will be at the balanced level. But yeah, that's generally why we use compressors. We also use it for kicks for the same reason. But that's the basic, that's the basic list of plugins to use on your synths. Make sure to go through some of the filters, the chorus. I could go through this quite quickly, but generally what chorus does is to fatten up your sound. Wow, I hate doing that. Fatten up your sound by having multiple versions of your sound going above each other with a little bit of delay, which is actually what we saw earlier, but the delay is extremely quick, like 15 milliseconds, like it happens almost instantly. And you have LFO effects that have to do with filters, things like that, and it also pitches your sound a little bit, so it can make it sound very pitched. But I like to have very light chorus. But yeah, generally that's what it does. Flangers and phasers fall into that same family of effects. It's like an automated filter. That's what flangers are. But yeah, that's it. I think that's it, guys. I will leave annotations and whatnot for the plugins, the explanation for each. I know this is quite a long tutorial, but I want to get in as much as possible. I know I didn't really get to do an actual song demonstration, but if you guys really want to see me do that, I can. Bear in mind, I will be coming up with the remix tutorial series, which is going to be quite big, and it'll be like from square one to like finishing the song or the remix. So you guys will be able to see all of that effect plugin stuff, because I definitely do add a fair amount. Remember not to use every single effect plugin I've shown you for every single one of your sounds. That will be horrible for your CPU, and it will make your sound horrible. You know what the sounds do, you know what the effects do, because I just showed it to you. Hopefully you understand. And if you ever want more ambience, if you ever want more echo, if you ever just kind of feel like having something added to your sound because it's missing out on something, you know where to get that effect. So reverb, delay, EQ, compressors, etc. Very useful. There's another one called distortion, and we all know what that does anyway, so I've done that before anyway, so good enough. I see you in the next tutorial, and Goodbye.